Good morning, people of Penn Christian Centre. Good to be with you. We thought perhaps this morning we could just have a very short time of worship. Doing stuff online is not quite as easy, but it still works. I'd like to lead us in a couple of songs of reflection and worship this morning. Wherever you may be today, whoever you may be with, sing out loud so we can all hear. Do you know, at this very unusual, extraordinary, unique time, there are lots of people raising all sorts of questions. Questions are very valid. They're sometimes extremely helpful. What's going on? Why is it happening? How are we going to resolve it? This is nothing new to our generation. In the Bible, people ask questions. There was a guy called Habakkuk, or as my American family would say, Habakkuk. He was a prophet, and it was towards the end of the time when the kingdoms of Israel and of Judah were being overthrown. And they were looking to the north, to the invading armies. And the horde was coming, the war was coming, the enemy was coming. And Habakkuk says to God, why? What's happening here? What's this all about? And he had a little discussion with God because he didn't understand why would God allow his people to be overrun, to be taken captive, to be exiled. And God had to explain to him that he was God and his plans would not be thwarted. And at the end, Habakkuk got to that point of recognizing that God's purposes were higher and greater than his. And despite the circumstances, his answer was to trust in God. You probably know the verses. He gets to the point at the end of his dialogue. It's recorded in Habakkuk chapter 3. Okay, God, though the fig tree doesn't blossom or bud, though there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Saviour. Despite circumstances, despite viruses, despite wars, despite difficulties. We know the character of Job. All sorts of things happen to him that I do not want to happen to me or to anyone near me. And he struggled too. He didn't understand what was going on, and there's a time, as recorded, when he had some doubts, he had some questions, he had some uncertainties. But it wasn't until towards the end he began to realize that he could not see things from God's perspective. He did not understand it, and God responded. And we had it recorded partly in chapter 38 of Job, when God spoke to his servant Job, and he asked some very searching questions, some rhetorical questions, some challenging questions. For example, he said, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Who shut up the sea behind doors, when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is what your proud waves, here's where your proud waves halt. And he goes on with various questions rhetorically. And then Job suddenly realized that he was standing before an almighty God that knew the answers even before he asked the questions. There's that lovely song we sing, isn't it? We need to get to that point. Despite my questions today, who can know the mind of our Creator? can know the mind of our Creator? Who can speak of wonders yet unseen? Who can reach the height of understanding, to play the notes of wisdom's melody? Who has weighed the dust of every mountain? Who has walked the mysteries of the deep? Who hath laid the earth on its foundation? And who conducts the waves upon the sea? I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you, so glorious and true. I stand in awe, I stand in awe. You have seen the end from the beginning. You have been before the world began. You have reached to be within my darkness, and in the light of mercy now I see. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you, so glorious and true. I stand in awe, I stand in awe, I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you, so glorious and true. I stand in awe, I stand in awe of you. As the psalmist discovered the same sort of experience, Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. I am the Lord that healeth thee. I am the Lord that healeth thee. I am the Lord that healeth thee. Well, think about this. Response: in thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. In thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. In thee, O Lord, all the questions, but we know the one who does. This morning, Lord, we want to worship you. We want to recognize you are the Almighty God. You can do what you want to do, and you are far above all of our thoughts and our capabilities and our questions. In this time of uncertainty, Lord, help us to trust you. Bless you as you worship the Lord today.